Hitler refuses to surrender. He pretends that everything is going well and pretends that he still has a chance, and things are just going worse and worse and worse for him. He thinks that he'll be saved with what he calls miracle weapons. This has like a 25 syllable name in German, but it comes down to miracle weapons. Germany innovated. They had some of the best military equipment around, years ahead of everyone else. Unfortunately, they spent so much money on research and development, they just did not have enough money and time and resources to put them into much effect. For instance, they invented rockets. They were pioneers in rockets. This little one on top of the wings is called a V1 rocket. It's about the size of a little plane. And this could be programmed to take off in Germany and go to a specific place in England and blow up. The one on the bottom is much, much bigger. It's called a V2, and that's like a classic rocket shape. Those had a long, long range, and they were terrorizing England, but he just didn't have very many of them. He did not have the factories available for those. On the bottom, you have the first jet plane in the world. It doesn't work on propellers pushing the air. It works kind of like a rocket. The fuel blows up and the exhaust shoots out behind it to push the plane forward. It could go way faster than Allied planes, much more maneuverable, and so did much better in a dogfight than Allied planes, but he had so few of them. And the Allies are able to churn out pretty good planes at a very, very fast speed, especially once America joins in. America has incredible factory output. He was working on the atomic bomb, but he wasn't even close to finishing it. He was hoping all these things would, miracle, win the war for him like a miracle, and they just didn't. He wasn't close to the atomic bomb because they never really tried all that hard until the end of the war. They considered atomic science to be Jewish science because some of the leading German scientists who worked on atomic theory were Jews, and they would include Niels Bohr, Albert Einstein, and James Franck. I'm sure you know at least one of those, maybe two of those. But before the war, Niels Bohr was working on atoms in his lab, splitting an atom in his lab, and he went, "Uh-oh, evacuate the building." And they had to evacuate because there was a little atomic accident. Some things caught fire. Thankfully, it wasn't too bad, but they kind of gave up that. What's happening in the Pacific? The Philippines were owned by America at the time. We got them from Spain during the Spanish-American War. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, they also attacked other American sites all across the Pacific. So the Philippines are much closer to Japan than Pearl Harbor or Hawaii is. We figured they would attack there. But we couldn't possibly defend all of the Philippines. There's like 3,000 islands out there. So we concentrated on the largest island, Luzon, that has the capital city, Manila. We need to defend them because we know what will happen if the Japanese attack. They're absolutely barbaric. What they do to civilians, it's nasty. We hold out the peninsula of Bataan and the island of Corregidor as long as we possibly can. Douglas MacArthur is there, a famous general. He had already won a Medal of Honor in World War I, and his father, Arthur MacArthur, won a Medal of Honor in even before World War I. I think it was the Spanish-American War. He won that. So very famous general, and he had been sent to the Philippines to defend against Japan, and he just simply doesn't have enough soldiers. Douglas MacArthur is such a high-value target that he is ordered to escape at all, if at all possible, while the rest of the American soldiers are ordered to stay there and defend Manila to the man. And so Douglas MacArthur sneaks away, makes a famous speech, "I shall return," sneaks away all the way down south to Australia. The Japanese figure out where he's gone, and they bomb Darwin, Australia, which is a town in the far northern part of Australia. They bomb it about half an hour after he had left that town by air. So the American soldiers on Bataan fought until they completely ran out of food, and then they kept on fighting. They ate seagulls that they managed to kill, and they wouldn't shoot the seagulls because they had so few bullets. So they'd throw rocks at seagulls overhead and eat those. They were eating rats. They ran out of fresh water, so they're drinking puddles. It's so bad. And finally, they're completely out of bullets. They're completely out of food. They finally surrender. And you know what the Japanese do to prisoners? They put them on this death march to a prison where so many of them died just on the road there. It's a jungle. It's over 100 degrees. There's movies made about that. Japan is winning, winning, winning. But they completely overextended themselves, and their army is now stretched thin. We sent 1/10 of our military to defeat them, and we're more than a match for Japan. By the end of 1942, our Pacific Fleet is pretty much where it was before harbor, which is just so fast. Our method of attack is called island hopping. There are way too many islands that Japan has taken for us to go get every single one. So we're going to concentrate on the important ones. The Battle of Coral Sea in 1942 was a major naval victory against Japan. This was a completely air-based battle on sea. We destroyed about 100,000 tons of their shipment. So that drastically reduced the number of islands that they can resupply. This also prevented them from attacking Australia. They had plans to invade Australia, and this stopped that. In the Battle of Midway, their fleet seriously outnumbered us, and it was terrible losses on both sides. However, we managed to sink 3 of their aircraft carriers in a single day, which is a major victory for us. And after the Battle of Midway, Japan is playing defense for the entire rest of the war. They are done. Crazy aerial shots of planes at all different altitudes. Those black puffs of smoke are anti-aircraft artillery, ACAC. You see several ships smoking, all sorts of things going on. So our island hopping strategy says ignore the unimportant ones, just take the ones that you need to. Well, what makes an island more important than another one? Well, one of the most important things that we're looking for is an airbase. If there is an enemy airbase in our rear, airplanes have a huge range, and so they could bomb so far out. On the other hand, if we have an airbase, then we can bomb wherever we want to. So if there is a small island that cannot support an airbase, just leave those soldiers there, ignore them, and if we get behind them, then they will not be able to get any more food or supplies, and they'll eventually either die or surrender, and we could ignore those battles. Fighting against the Japanese was incredibly difficult. Their culture told them to never surrender. That death in battle is amazing, and surrendering is one of the most cowardly things you could possibly do. So they almost never surrendered. And when they did, they were so ashamed of themselves. They would often try to kill themselves in jail. We would try to collect their names so that we could tell their loved ones that they're still alive. And they would give fake names because they did not want their loved ones to think that they're alive. They want their loved ones to think that they died gloriously in battle. So it's very different than the way we think. A European army, like even the Nazis, when they know that they're about to lose, they would rather surrender and live, even if they live in jail for the rest of the war. If an American army knows that they're surrounded, they will surrender. The Japanese, they will fight to the very last man, and that causes a lot of unnecessary casualties. One of their famous tricks is when they know they're about to lose, they'll attach bayonets, get drunk, yell banzai, and just charge at the enemy and come in among us with bayonets. And usually it's completely by surprise, and no one in their right mind would charge us, and they will all die to the man. But they might do a lot of damage while they're doing that. Very similarly, towards the end of the war, they're doing so poorly that they figure the only thing that they can do to defeat us is to drive their planes into our ships, kamikaze pilots. And that actually worked fairly well, because even if you shoot down the plane, well, they're aimed at you, so this burning pile of plane is coming straight at you anyway. Very dangerous, but they're willing to die for their country. By the fall of 1944, MacArthur made good on his promise and returned to the Philippines. There's a very famous speech of him saying, "I have returned." There he is in the middle. To accomplish this return and recapture of the Philippines, which you should remember is American soil, they had to fight a terrible naval battle, Battle of Leyte Gulf. Leyte is a place in the Philippines. This was the largest naval battle in history. There were about 200,000 sailors involved in this battle, and it was almost completely one-sided. We won it hands down. Japan lost 40 ships in a single battle. After the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the Japanese never once were able to mount a serious navy or a serious naval attack ever again. It's not just because they lost all their ships. It's also because many of their battleships are stuck in harbor with no fuel. One of the reasons that Japan had been so aggressive in making a Pacific-wide empire is that they needed oil. And so they attacked everywhere around them to get the oil. Well, now that the war has gone on for a while, they have used a ton of diesel in their battleships and whatnot. I don't know how many inches to the gallon they get. They're insane gas hogs. Well, now the Americans have pushed back and have retaken many of shipping routes and many of the places that have oil in them. And now a lot of their tankers have been shot down, blown up by submarines or airplanes, and the battleships that escorted tankers are now destroyed as well. So whatever navy they have is pretty much incapacitated by the time that we retake the Philippines. In 1945, we attacked Iwo Jima and Okinawa, insane battles. Both of these battles are like mini D-Days. When I say mini, not that many, but they are amphibious assaults, very much like D-Day. The Marines had been doing assaults like these constantly. Every single island we attack in the Pacific is like D-Day all over again, where there's aerial bombardment for days, the battleships blow up the island for days and days, and then finally the Marines go in. And just like on D-Day, we found that the resistance would be pretty terrible, even with thousands of bombs and shells dropped. The really dug-in bunkers would be several feet underground with several feet of reinforced concrete, and they would survive. And so every single amphibious landing was terrible. Here's some pictures of Iwo Jima. I'm sure you've seen some pictures of them before. They are volcanic islands, so the sand is very dark, sometimes even black, because it's just lava that's been pushed up. Notice how steep these cliffs are. They're perfect for digging in and having places to shoot out across the entire beach. Notice in the middle one, we had flamethrower tanks. These tanks would have had a flamethrower replacing their main gun, and they were very effective for getting pillboxes, which would have had very tiny openings for a gun to peek out, and so it would be very difficult to shoot in, but a flamethrower would be fairly effective. Unfortunately, they don't have very much of a range, so you have to get really up close to do that. Marines found that the best way to take out these pillboxes, really the only way, is to get up close and throw grenades in. It's practically impossible to shoot the people inside the pillboxes. There's a tiny, tiny window. So what they would try to do is concentrate all their fire on these pillboxes so that the Japanese don't dare poke their heads out, then run up and throw grenades in. One gentleman got the Medal of Honor for all the caves and pillboxes he blew up. After he ran out of grenades, he had his men go back and get a whole crate of grenades from the shore, and they ran that crate up to him as men were passing him grenade after grenade as he was throwing them in pillboxes. Once he ran out of grenades, he got creative and he took the gas cans from the Jeeps and whatnot. They would have been 4 or 5 gallon metal cans full of gasoline, and he'd stick a piece of dynamite on it with duct tape and throw it in the mouth of a cave, because of a cave-in. On the bottom, you see a backpack radio. That was the best method of communication they had. These radios would have had very large antennas. This one does not seem to be very big. It's probably just not telescoped out. But of course, radios did not have any sort of encryption on them back then. Anyone could pick up your radio signals. So they would use code, but you don't know how long it will take for the enemy to break your code. So one method that we used to have really good communications was with Navajos. We had a bunch of Navajo Indians who would go out to the Pacific in the U.S. Army. They would work as radio operators and speak Navajo. Anyone can learn German. Anyone could learn Japanese. Before the war, plenty of Americans learned Japanese for their business transactions with Japan, and there were Japanese dictionaries and whatnot. And I'm sure more people learned Japanese during the war so that they could spy on the bad guys. Well, no one knew Navajo apart from the Navajos. So there's some wonderful movies about that. The Japanese never managed to crack our Navajo code. Pretty cool. And of course, at the top of the mountain, we have a bunch of Marines and sailors raising up the American flag in this iconic picture. There's Iwo Jima, just south of Japan, and Okinawa. Okinawa was very important for a couple of reasons. First of all, Okinawa was owned by Japan before war broke out. It's considered part of Japan. So for the first time we invaded Japan, we didn't just retake lands that had been free before. Second really important reason is that from Okinawa, they're within striking distance of Japan by air. We can now have bombers, long-range bombers in Okinawa that could take off, go bomb Japan, and come back. So we immediately start firebombing Japan, and it was absolutely terrible. Japanese cities were mostly built out of wood and paper back then, paper walls. So when we dropped these white phosphorus shells from the sky, tens of thousands of them, the whole city would go up in blaze. Our incendiary bombs could light a piece of wood on fire from about 100 feet away. They got that hot. It's incredible. Caused really terrible damage. What's going on in Europe at the time? So Russia, after winning the Battle of Stalingrad, went on the offensive, and Germany's retreating. And Russia just keeps on winning victory after victory on their front from 1943 to 44. After D-Day, our troops keep moving in, and we eventually recapture Paris. And there's a picture of United States soldiers marching through the Arc de Triomphe in the center of Paris. Now that we're getting closer and closer to Germany, we can have more and more bomber runs. And so the German cities are getting decimated. And by December 1944, we had reached Germany's western border. So we're about to invade Germany itself. At this point, even though the Germans are losing ground steadily on both sides, Hitler decides to have a last-ditch effort, gather all the soldiers, all the tanks he can, and attack. His generals think that this is suicide, and it really is. They know that they could do a surprise attack, and they might do some damage, but there is no hope of lasting victory. They're running out of food, out of money. They have very little ammunition, very little gasoline, just like Japan. They're running low on everything, and they cannot wage an effective war anymore. By the way, Hitler's great surprise attack, the Blitzkrieg of the beginning of the war, that works when you have most of your troops mobilized. But throughout World War II, only about 5% of his infantry battalions were fully mechanized. At this point in the war, he has almost no tanks, he has almost no trucks and motorcycles for his troops. It's a last-ditch effort. And his generals know that even if they do get a significant chunk of land, there's no way that they could hold it for more than a few weeks. But Hitler is boss, and even when he makes terrible decisions, everyone follows him. When he tells his soldiers to do a suicide mission, they do it. They do gain a good deal of land back in France, but it ends in great failure and actually sped up the end of the war. If they had slowly but steadily retreated, they could have lasted a lot longer than gambling all in this one big attack and then losing it. It was a surprise attack in the dead of winter. Our soldiers were ill-equipped. For whatever reason, our boots were not waterproof, so many of our soldiers are getting frostbite. I guess that's what happens when you make millions of pairs of boots very cheaply and very quickly. And several of our divisions and groups were separated from one another. Unfortunately, maybe you've heard the story of Bastogne and General McAuliffe there. In December 2012, this is just a few weeks before Christmas. They're surrounded, they're running out of food and ammunition, and the German general sends a very gracious letter here to USA commander of encircled town of Bastogne, December 22nd, by the way, so just a few days before Christmas. And blah, 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 he says, there's no hope for you, just surrender, and we promise to be kind to you, but we are, completely surrounding you, and there's no hope for you. And some kind of, lower level official brought that to the Americans and asked for a reply, and General McAuliffe wrote this short note to the German commander. Nuts, the American commander. And the German messenger looked at that, and he spoke English fluently, but he had no idea what this means. And he said, excuse me, General McAuliffe, sir, does that mean yes or no? And McAuliffe just kind of grunted and walked away, but one of the Americans said, in very colorful language, it means no. And so the Germans attacked throughout Christmas, but they were not able to capture Bastogne. And we were able to relieve them and break through the German lines before they surrendered. Quite a famous bit of U.S. history. We waited at the Elbe River near the border of Germany until Russia caught up. It was, some kind of being kind to our allies. We wanted to make sure that we didn't get too far ahead of them. And the Russians did eventually catch up. Here's a picture on the top of Americans and Russians shaking hands. On the bottom, there's a Russian putting the Soviet flag on top of Berlin, some big house in Berlin. Hitler committed suicide. Many of his top officials committed suicide as well. They had been hiding out in a bunker for a long time. Several of them had family members there, and they killed their family members before killing themselves. Hitler got married to his girlfriend, and they all killed themselves. Burned Hitler's body so it wouldn't be put on display. And on May 7th, 1945, the remaining German generals surrender. It's Victory in Europe Day, VE Day. So now all our soldiers in Europe can come home, and 100% of our attention can be spent on defeating Japan. Unfortunately, we probably have to talk about the Holocaust a little bit. Holocaust is an old word meaning complete destruction by fire, so completely burning something up, and it is used to describe the terrible extermination program that Hitler had against the Jews, against Africans, against homosexuals, against communists, against anyone he didn't like, but mostly against Jews. He blamed them for all the problems that Germany faced and killed many of them. The Holocaust was mostly a secret. Not hardly anyone knew that they were actually killing all the Jews. What the official story was is that we're rounding up these bad people and we're putting them behind bars until the war is over. So that's what most of Germany and the world thought, that everyone's getting rounded up and being put behind barbed wire, and they're working towards the war effort, making stuff, and they'll be let out once the war is over. Of course, that's not what was happening. They were all being murdered at a very quick rate. And as we are advancing and advancing, we eventually find some of these death camps and liberate them, and the world finds out what happened going on. It made us so angry that most of the German guards at these death camps, they were not allowed to surrender. They tried to surrender and we shot them, which is not, that's against the rules of war, but we were just so angry. That bottom picture has German civilians in a nearby town being told, you are going to come here and you're going to bury all these bodies. First, you're going to take a tour and see what your people have been doing, and then you're going to bury the bodies. American soldiers are not going to do that. You see here women who are just absolutely horrified about what's going on. We don't know exactly how many were killed, but it's approximately 6 million people were slaughtered. I'm sure you know some of the history. If you are just having too happy of a day and you want to ruin your day, I would highly recommend the movie The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, a movie that is very well done, very accurate, and it's about a family whose dad is in the German military and his dad is in charge of running a death camp, and the family doesn't know about it. And the boy in the striped pajamas is a little boy in the death camp who's wearing a prison outfit, and the German guard's son is the same age, and they meet each other, and it's terribly sad, but it's also terribly accurate. When American generals found out what was going on here, Eisenhower in particular said, we need to get as many photographers and reporters as possible to take pictures of everything, because in a few years, people are going to say that this never happened. And that's very true. In just a few decades, there were Holocaust deniers everywhere who said, oh, it never happened, or it was exaggerated, or it's just Allied propaganda against the Nazis. But there are millions of pictures of the Holocaust out there. They could not have all been staged. I would not recommend going to Google Images and looking for pictures of the Holocaust. It is nasty. It will scar you for life, but it is out there. At this time, I think it would be appropriate to mention that America did have concentration camps. As soon as the bombs hit in Pearl Harbor, FDR signed a law that said that all Japanese Americans must be imprisoned for the length of the war. So soldiers rounded up all the Japanese Americans, the immigrants, the visitors, even Japanese Americans who had been citizens all their lives. They're all rounded up and put behind barbed wire for the entire war. This is one of the worst actions that America has ever taken. It is absolutely shameful. Why in the world would America do this? Well, the excuse is, well, some of them might be spies. So we're going to put every single Japanese American behind barbed wire for the remainder of the war. I think these pictures are absolutely sorrowful. Unlike Germany, these are true concentration camps. They were not death camps. We didn't kill them. We just put them in these barracks. And I'm sure it was uncomfortable. You're living in a dorm room instead of living in your house. The space is crowded. You have no freedom. But at least they aren't getting beaten and they aren't getting killed. I think this middle picture is so sad because here's a bunch of Japanese kids, little kids, and what are they doing? At the beginning of the school day, they're saying, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Wow. They're doing that inside a concentration camp. Now, thankfully, even though many people are racist like this picture shows and like the R shows. Even though this is really terrible, there are plenty of people who fight out against this and try to help as much as they can. There are lots of stories of school teachers who teach all day in their school and then go to the Japanese internment camp and teach the kids there because they say they don't want any of their students to go without an education. And, this lasts for several years, like 3 or 4 years. So they would have missed a big chunk of their education if their teachers had not doubled their workday to teach in their own school and then come to the concentration camp and teach in their school. I read a story about a farmer whose neighbor, the next farm over, was taken. And so for the next several years, about 3.5 years, this farmer worked both of their fields. And at the end of the internment, when they were let out, the Japanese farmer is incredibly grateful and tries to pay him for the upkeep of his field. And he says, "No way, you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't say anything wrong, and you were put in jail for no reason for 3 years for just because America's racist. There's no way you're going to pay me." So there are stories of hope during this time, but very dreadful part of American history. Even though we were putting a ton of Japanese behind barbed wire, there were plenty of Japanese American young men who joined the military. One of them was Daniel Inoue. He lived in Hawaii. He was of Japanese descent, which, by the way, a large percentage of Hawaiians are of Japanese descent. And as soon as Pearl Harbor started, he was young. He was 16, 17. He joined the military as soon as he was allowed to, and he got tons of medals in Europe. I believe he fought in Italy first. He got the Medal of Honor even for storming a German pillbox all by himself. He lost his left arm, and it was shot off. And he kept on fighting, even after he had lost his arm. He got the Medal of Honor for that. And he went into politics, and he became a senator from the state of Hawaii. And he was even the president pro tempore of the United States Senate for many, many years. He just passed away a few years ago. The Big Three met at Potsdam once again near the end of the war to try to determine what would happen after the war. On the top, you have a picture of Stalin on the right, and Truman, and then Churchill on the left. Well, FDR was supposed to be the president going to Potsdam, but he died unexpectedly. He had a stroke, and he died within minutes, and he's gone. So his vice president, Truman, is sent to replace him. Also, in the middle of these conferences, they lasted a couple weeks, but in the middle, Churchill was voted out of office. There's Churchill on the top, and on the bottom, he is replaced by Clement Attlee. Churchill was incredibly popular during the war, but towards the end of the war, he was getting very much less popular because he was more of a wartime leader, and he advocated continuing the war. In fact, he wanted to attack Russia directly after World War II. He wanted to fight Stalin. He knew that Stalin was as big a threat against democracy as Hitler ever was. And in a perfect world, yeah, we would have gotten rid of Stalin. But we can't afford World War III to start the minute after World War II stops. So Britain says, we're done with war, and they replace him with Clement Attlee. The Potsdam Conference issued an ultimatum to Japan saying, you must surrender immediately, and you must do it, or something bad's going to happen. Well, what do you think is going to happen? Well, we first start ramping up our bombing to an insane level. This is on the top of just thousands of incendiary bombs falling, completely decimating the city. On the bottom, there's bombers going past Mount Fuji. Japan responded by pulling all their forces back from their empire and preparing for invasion of mainland Japan. It might have cost us an estimated 2 million soldiers' lives to attack Japan. If Okinawa and Iwo Jima cost tens of thousands of lives each, how hard would they fight for mainland Japan? It would have been an insanely long fight. We could have fought for years and years and years more, and we really want the war to end. It's a picture of the destruction caused by our bombing. I'm sure you know what happened to cause the Japanese to surrender. It's the atomic bomb. The project making the atomic bomb was incredibly secret. It was so secret that the vice president didn't know anything about it. When FDR dies and Truman is sworn in as president, they say, Mr. Truman, sir, Mr. President, we have a surprise for you. We've been working on an atomic bomb, and it's ready. To make an atomic bomb, you have to get uranium, and uranium is found in natural deposits in America, so we find it, but you have to refine it to an incredible degree. And it was taking us months and months and months to refine just the tiniest bit of uranium. The idea behind a nuclear bomb is not very difficult to understand. You take uranium and you squish it, and you squish it, squish it, and squish it until it goes boom. And when it goes boom, there's a lot of energy released. This is called a fission bomb, where you're actually splitting atoms in half. And when you do that, they crack in half, and a lot of energy and neutrons and protons and electrons are released to go flying everywhere. And they smash into other atoms, and they split in half, and just does a chain reaction and keeps on going, going, going. Well, the idea behind just compressing uranium is not very difficult to understand, but how to do it was a nightmare. It has to be incredibly precise. You usually surround a sphere of uranium with incredibly powerful regular explosives and blow it up all at the exact same time. So the force of that is all going in. That's the kind in the Fat Man on the right. The other kind of bomb here, the little boy on the left, is called a gun, where you take a donut shape of uranium and you shoot it really fast at a cone shape, and that squishes them together and it goes boom. So we had been refining uranium for the longest time, and we have enough for 3 different bombs. We test one of them, and it works. We now have uranium for 2 bombs, and we tell Japan, we have this insanely powerful bomb, and if you don't surrender, we're going to blow up one of your cities with a single bomb. And they don't surrender. Then we drop the blue one, the little guy, on Hiroshima, completely obliterates the city in an instant. Almost every single person in that city is dead. There's a mushroom cloud that people have never seen before. There's black rain coming down from the sky. The rain is radioactive. And hundreds of thousands of people die, and even more die of radiation over the next several decades. We don't surrender, and so a few days later, we dropped an even more powerful bomb on Nagasaki. After that second bomb, we said, surrender, we're going to keep going, but we didn't have any more bombs. We said we did, and they surrendered. These two combined killed about 220,000 people in the first couple days, with several hundred thousand more dead over the course of the next several decades. Radiation poisoning, think of radiation like X-rays. It goes right through your muscles and skin, it stops at your bones. And so it usually kills your bones first. And your bones are alive. Your bones make red blood cells and white blood cells. And when your bones die, you get this blood disease called leukemia, which is really, really nasty. We send the USS Missouri battleship to Tokyo Harbor and invite their dignitaries to come on and sign the peace treaty, USS Missouri. There they are, military and civilian leaders. Notice at the top right, you see these giant guns, and they're signing the peace treaty in the shadow of America's most powerful weapons. Look how big those are. Well, we've won. The war is over. Italy was the first to surrender, then Germany, and now finally Japan. Fun fact in this famous picture, these two people do not know each other. All 3 nations surrendered unconditionally, and none of these 3 nations will ever be a threat to us ever again. But what did World War II cost? Well, in today's dollars, $4 trillion. War is expensive. Add to that, 416,000 Americans died. That seems like a very big number, and it is. But when you compare it to the other major allies, it's really not very much compared to them. 24 million Soviets died. And only about a little less than half of those were soldiers. So millions upon millions of Soviet civilians died. The Soviets played a very large part in World War II. They suffered more casualties than any other nation, and they inflicted more casualties on Germany than any other nation. They might have been able to win the war single-handedly if America had never joined in. They did a terrific job against Germans, but they paid dearly for it. Another thing to put into perspective, America lost about 416,000 soldiers and just over 1,000 civilians. The British lost about 450,000 soldiers and civilians. Many of those are civilians, again, because England's cities have been bombed London has been bombed to smithereens. How many bombs landed on America? Not very many. There were actually a couple of bombs that the Japanese tied hot air balloons and floated across the entire Pacific Ocean. And one of them landed on forest in Oregon, I believe, or Washington, and did kill a handful of people. But nothing compared to the heavy bombing that went on in England at the time. And just compare how big America is versus how big England is, and England lost more people overall. That means their percentage of losses as a percentage of the population is just incredibly high. Worldwide, about 15 million soldiers died in battle, 25 million soldiers wounded, some of them severely wounded. 45 million civilians died, and that's during the war. Several million more will die after the war from famine and starvation. We won the war, but it was at a heavy, heavy cost. It will take many years to recover from it, but we did win.